the unseen. The world ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. It began as an ordinary day in the city, a bustling metropolis filled with the noise of life, the hum of traffic, and the chatter of millions going about their daily routines. No one noticed the subtle shift in the air, the way the light seemed to dim just a fraction, or the strange, almost imperceptible tremor beneath their feet. It was as if the world itself held its breath, waiting. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the fog rolled in. At first it was just a low mist, creeping in from the outskirts, curling around the edges of the city like a cold, damp shroud. People barely gave it a second thought, pulling their coats tighter and hurrying home, eager to escape the sudden chill. But the fog didn't stop at the edges. It thickened, spreading through the streets, seeping into every crack and crevice, swallowing the city whole. By midnight the fog was everywhere, so dense that even the brightest lights could barely pierce it. The city's once familiar sounds were muffled, distorted, replaced by an eerie, unsettling silence that wrapped around everything like a blanket. And within that silence, something else began to stir. It started with the voices. They were soft at first, no louder than a breath, barely more than a sensation at the edge of hearing. Whispers, indistinct and fleeting like the murmurs of the wind. But there was something in those whispers, something cold and ancient, something that didn't belong. As the hours dragged on, the whispers grew louder, taking on a life of their own. They echoed through the empty streets, slipping through cracks in doors and windows, finding their way into the homes of the unsuspecting. People began to hear things, snatches of conversations, familiar voices calling their names, words that seemed to come from nowhere. Panic spread like wildfire as the whispers became more insistent, more real. People reported seeing shadows moving in the fog, shapes that twisted and flickered just beyond the edge of vision. Some claimed the fog was alive, that it was watching them, following them. Others spoke of nightmares that bled into reality, of things that shouldn't exist but did. The city was consumed by fear, its people retreating indoors, huddling together in the vain hope that they could shut out the terror that lurked outside. But the fog was relentless, seeping through walls, filling every space with its cold, suffocating presence, and the whispers never stopped. By dawn, the city was a ghost town. The streets were empty, the buildings silent. The fog had swallowed everything, leaving nothing behind but a faint echo of what had once been. Those few who remained wandered through the haze like lost souls, their eyes wide with terror, their minds broken by the relentless whispers that clawed at their sanity. In the heart of the city, where the fog was thickest, something new began to form. A structure, twisted and unnatural, rose from the ground, pulsing with an eerie light. It was a gateway, a rift between worlds torn open by forces beyond human understanding, and through that rift came the echoes, beings of pure malevolence, drawn to the fear and despair that saturated the city. They were the shadows in the fog, the voices in the dark. They were the unseen, the remnants of a world long forgotten, seeking to reclaim what had been lost. They fed on the living, on their terror and their pain, growing stronger with every soul they consumed. The city fell into chaos, its people fleeing in all directions, desperate to escape the horrors that now stalked the streets. But there was no escape. The fog had spread beyond the city, creeping across the land, carrying with it the whispers of the echoes, the promise of oblivion. And so the world ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper, as the fog claimed everything, leaving behind only silence and the echoes of a past that could never be forgotten. In the years that followed, the city became a legend, a place spoken of in hushed tones, a warning of what lay beyond the veil of reality. But for those who still wandered its empty streets, there was no escape, no solace. The whispers were always there, waiting, reminding them that the world had not simply ended. It had been consumed, the whispering ruins. The city lay in ruin, a skeletal reminder of a world that had once thrived with life. Now, only the wind moved through the hollowed-out buildings, carrying with it the ash of countless fires that had long since burned out. The air was thick with a choking fog, an unnatural shroud that clung to everything it touched, warping sounds and distorting reality. Elena moved through the debris with the practiced silence of someone who had survived far too long in a world that was no longer hers. Each step was calculated, every breath measured. She had learned the hard way that noise meant death in this place. The echoes were always listening, always searching for any sign of life to feed upon. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in the crumbling skyscrapers that loomed like sentinels over the dead city. The ground beneath her was a patchwork of cracked asphalt and twisted metal, remnants of a civilization that had collapsed under its own weight. She clutched the old leather-bound book to her chest, the only clue she had to the mystery that had consumed her since the collapse. Elena had found the book months ago in an abandoned library, buried under a pile of rubble. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and haunting illustrations that she couldn't decipher. But something about the book called to her, pulling her deeper into the city, closer to the truth she both feared and craved. As she turned a corner, she froze, listening. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the faintest of sounds, a whisper, so soft it could have been her imagination. But Elena knew better. The echoes were near. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of disembodied voices that seemed to come from all directions. They were calling her name, mimicking the voices of people she had lost long ago. Elena, Elena. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. The echoes could sense emotion as much as they could hear sound. They fed on it, drawing closer with every hint of fear or despair. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a cacophony in her ears. Elena shut her eyes, willing herself to disappear, to become as silent and still as the ruins around her. After what felt like an eternity, the whispers began to fade, the echoes losing interest when they couldn't find a source for their torment. Slowly, Elena opened her eyes and exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But as she turned to continue her journey, she saw her. A girl no older than 12 stood in the middle of the street, staring directly at Elena. Her hair was tangled, her clothes torn and dirty, but it was her eyes that made Elena's blood run cold. They were wide with fear, but there was something else there, something that shouldn't have been possible in this desolate place. Hope, the girl who could see. Elena's instinct screamed at her to run, to leave the girl behind and disappear into the fog, but something in those eyes held her in place. The girl took a hesitant step forward, her gaze never leaving Elena. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't leave me." Elena hesitated, the weight of the book pressing against her chest. She had survived this long by trusting no one, by keeping to herself. But there was something about this girl, something that felt different. Elena couldn't bring herself to turn away. "What's your name?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mara?" the girl replied, her eyes welling with tears. "My name is Mara." Elena took a cautious step forward, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The echoes had gone silent, but that didn't mean they weren't still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. "How did you survive out here, Mara?" Elena asked, her voice still low. Mara looked down at the ground, her small hands trembling. I can feel them. The echoes. I know when they're close." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. The echoes were almost impossible to detect until it was too late. If Mara could sense them before they attacked, she was more valuable than Elena had realized. "Why are you out here alone?" Elena pressed, her mind racing with possibilities. Mara hesitated, her gaze shifting to the fog-covered buildings around them. "My brother, he went into the city. He said he was going to find a way to stop the echoes, but he hasn't come back." Elena felt a pang of sympathy, but she quickly pushed it aside. In this world, caring for others was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the look on Mara's face, the desperation in her voice, made it hard to ignore. "Where did he go?" Elena asked, already regretting the question. Mara pointed toward the heart of the city, where the fog was thickest and the ruins most treacherous. He said there was something in the center of the city, something that could close the gate. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The gate. The word sent a shiver down her spine. The book she carried spoke of a gateway, a rift between worlds that had been torn open during the collapse. If Mara's brother had found a way to close it. "Take me to him," Elena said before she could change her mind. Mara's eyes widened in surprise and relief. "You'll help me find him." Elena nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. "But you have to stay close to me, and you have to be quiet. The echoes are drawn to noise." Mara nodded eagerly, wiping away her tears. "I can be quiet, I promise." With a final glance around, Elena set off toward the city's center, Mara following closely behind. The fog seemed to thicken as they moved deeper into the ruins, the buildings growing more twisted and decayed. The whispers returned, but this time they were distant, as if the echoes were watching from afar, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elena tightened her grip on the book, its cryptic symbols and eerie illustrations a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that lay ahead. She had a feeling that whatever they found in the heart of the city would change everything, but whether it would be for better or worse, she didn't know. The Silent Ones. As they ventured deeper into the city, the fog thickened to the point where it was almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The once familiar streets were now a maze of debris and decay, each corner hiding the potential for danger. Elena's every sense was on high alert, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the fragments of information she had gathered over the months. Mara was a silent shadow beside her, her small hand occasionally brushing against Elena's arm as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The girl's ability to sense the echoes was proving invaluable, as she would often tug on Elena's sleeve just before the whispers began to grow louder, allowing them to take a different path. But there was something else too, something unsettling that Elena couldn't quite put her finger on. The deeper they went into the city, the more she felt as though they were being watched, not just by the echoes, but by something else. Something that lurked in the shadows, just out of sight. They came to a stop at the edge of what had once been a grand plaza, now a wasteland of cracked stone and dead trees. In the center of the plaza stood a massive twisted structure that seemed to defy all logic. It pulsed with a faint, eerie light, the air around it humming with an unnatural energy. "That's it," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. "That's where my brother went." Elena stared at the structure, her heart pounding in her chest. The book in her hands seemed to grow heavier, the symbols on its cover glowing faintly as if in response to the energy emanating from the structure. "Stay close to me," Elena said, her voice barely audible. "And whatever happens, don't make a sound." Mara nodded, her eyes wide with fear and anticipation. Together they stepped into the plaza, the ground beneath them vibrating with each pulse of the structure. As they approached, Elena's senses went into overdrive. The whispers of the echoes were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on her like a physical weight. It was as if the entire world had gone still, holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. They reached the base of the structure, and Elena could see now that it was made of a material she couldn't identify, something that seemed to shift and change with every glance. The symbols in the book began to glow brighter, the pages rustling as if moved by an unseen hand. Mara gasped, her eyes fixed on something just beyond the structure. Elena followed her gaze and felt her blood run cold. There, standing in the shadows, was a group of figures. They were human in shape, but their features were blurred, indistinct, as if they were only partially real. Their eyes were empty voids, and they stood perfectly still, watching Elena and Mara with an intensity that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. "The Silent Ones," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. "They're the ones who came before." Elena had heard stories of the Silent Ones, survivors who had lost themselves to the echoes, their souls trapped between worlds. They were said to be neither dead nor alive, eternally bound to the ruins of the city, guardians of the gate. One of the figures stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It reached out a hand toward Elena, its fingers elongated and thin, as if made of smoke. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the light from the structure dimming. Elena's instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The Silent One's hand hovered inches from her face, and for a brief moment she thought she saw something in its empty eyes, a flicker of recognition of humanity. Then, without warning, the figure recoiled, as if burned by an invisible force. The book in Elena's hands blazed with light, the symbols on its pages glowing with a brilliant intensity. The Silent Ones shrank back, their forms dissolving into the shadows as the light grew stronger. Mara clutched Elena's arm, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. What's happening? Elena didn't know. The book seemed to have a mind of its own, its pages turning rapidly, the symbols rearranging themselves into a pattern that Elena could almost, but not quite, understand. The structure began to tremble, the ground beneath them shaking with a force that threatened to knock them off their feet. The Silent Ones had disappeared, but Elena knew they were still watching, waiting. The light from the book coalesced into a beam that shot toward the structure, striking it with a soundless explosion. The structure shuddered, the pulses of light growing erratic, as if it was struggling to maintain its form. Elena felt a surge of energy course through her, the book's power merging with her own. She could see now that the symbols were a map, a guide to closing the gate. But it required a sacrifice, a life for a life, a soul for a soul. She looked down at Mara, who was staring at the structure with a mixture of awe and terror. The girl's brother had come here with the same purpose, and he had failed. But Elena knew that if she didn't act now, if she didn't make the sacrifice, the gate would remain open. And the echoes would continue to haunt the world, feeding on the living until there was nothing left. The choice was hers. The final sacrifice. Time seemed to slow as Elena weighed her options. The structure before them was failing, its form flickering like a dying flame. The book in her hands was vibrating with energy, its light growing brighter with every passing second. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, a choice that would determine the fate of not just herself and Mara, but perhaps the entire world. The symbols on the pages seemed to dance, rearranging themselves into a final, clear message. A life must be given to close the gate. Elena's mind raced. The sacrifice didn't have to be hers. Mara was young, innocent, and yet, if it came down to it, Elena knew she couldn't do it. She couldn't condemn the girl to that fate, not after everything they had been through together. But who else? Her thoughts turned to the Silent Ones, those lost souls who had already given everything to protect the city from the horrors beyond the gate. If they were still bound to this world, perhaps they could fulfill the sacrifice required to seal the gate for good. Elena looked at Mara, who was watching her with wide, trusting eyes. The girl had no idea what was at stake, no idea what Elena was contemplating. The weight of that trust made Elena's decision all the more agonizing. But there was no time left. The structure was beginning to collapse, the gate within it tearing open. A swirling vortex of darkness and light that threatened to consume everything. Elena knelt in front of Mara, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I need you to listen to me," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I'm going to do something, and it might be dangerous. But you have to trust me, okay?" Mara nodded, her lower lip trembling. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to close the gate," Elena said. "But I need you to stay here, stay safe. No matter what happens, don't move." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. "Okay, I'll stay." Elena gave her a tight smile, then stood up and turned toward the structure. The light from the book was almost blinding now, the symbols on its pages shifting into a final, coherent pattern. She could feel the energy within the book reaching its peak, ready to unleash its power. She walked forward, toward the swirling vortex that had opened in the heart of the structure. The closer she got, the more she could feel the pull of the otherworldly forces at work, drawing her in, testing her resolve. Then, With a final deep breath, she opened the book and held it out toward the vortex. The symbols on the pages began to glow with an intense light, the energy within them surging forth in a brilliant beam that struck the vortex dead center. The ground shook violently, and the air was filled with a deafening roar as the vortex began to collapse in on itself. Elena could feel the pull of the gate intensifying, trying to drag her in with it, but she held her ground, pouring all of her willpower into the book, forcing the gate to close. And then, just as it seemed the gate would swallow her whole, she felt a presence behind her. She turned her head slightly and saw the Silent Ones, their forms shimmering in the light of the collapsing gate. They were no longer passive observers, they were moving toward the vortex, their features twisted in pain but filled with determination. They had come to fulfill the sacrifice. Elena's heart ached as she watched them move forward, their forms dissolving into the light as they entered the vortex. One by one, they gave themselves to the gate, their souls merging with the energy that was closing it. The last of the Silent Ones, the one who had reached out to Elena earlier, paused for a moment, its empty eyes meeting hers. There was a sense of peace in that gaze, a silent understanding that this was how it had to be. And then it was gone, consumed by the vortex. With a final surge of energy, the gate snapped shut, the vortex disappearing in a flash of light that left Elena momentarily blinded. The ground beneath her stopped shaking, the air still and silent once more. When her vision cleared, Elena saw that the structure was gone, leaving only a scorched mark on the ground where it had stood. The book in her hands had gone cold, its light extinguished, the symbols now nothing more than faint impressions on the pages. Mara was still standing where Elena had left her, her eyes wide with shock and awe. Elena walked over to her, her legs feeling like lead, and pulled the girl into a tight embrace. "It's over," Elena whispered, more to herself than to Mara. "It's finally over." Mara clung to her, tears streaming down her face. What happened? Where did they go? Elena didn't have the heart to explain. The Silent Ones had given everything to close the gate, to protect the world from the horrors that lay beyond. Their sacrifice had saved them all. "They're at peace now," Elena said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Mara's face. "They're where they belong." Mara nodded, her tears slowly subsiding. "Are we safe now?" Elena looked out at the ruined city, at the fog that was beginning to lift, revealing the broken landscape beneath. The echoes were gone, their whispers silenced for good. The world was still a dangerous place, but for the first time since the collapse, there was hope. "Yes," Elena said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We're safe." And with that, she took Mara's hand, and together they began to walk away from the plaza, away from the ruins and the memories of the past, toward whatever future awaited them. It's not the end, just the beginning. Subscribe to the channel to be among the first to see the next part of this story and other exciting videos. Set the bell so you don't miss a new episode.